Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, Joyce, ma'am. Dr. Ashik, can you make Joyce, ma'am, as co-host? Good morning, ma'am. Yeah, 1 second. Dr. Ashik? Yes, yes.
This is the co-host now.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, Ashik, thank you. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, Anita.
Yeah,
Good morning.
We start the thing.
Morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Ma'am, can we start the meeting, ma'am?
Please start.
Yeah.
Shall I begin, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay. A very good morning to one and all. The Department of Zoology, Madras Christian College invites you all for this international webinar on effects of climate change on biodiversity. As Bible says, seek first the kingdom of God. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 33, it is fitting to seek God's presence before we begin with this webinar. May I now call upon Dr. Alan Freddy to pray and invoke God's presence.
Shall we all bow our heads in a word of prayer? Our loving Heavenly Father, we thank you, O Lord, for this wonderful day and time that you've given us. O Lord, thank you for keeping all of us in good health and strength. Amidst this pandemic, you kept all of us safe, O Lord. We praise you for everything that you've given us. O Lord, we bring into your presence today's webinar that is happening, O Lord. We pray for all the participants that have come here, the chief guest, our principal, the organizers, and all others who are helping in conducting this webinar. Let this be a blessing. Let your presence be felt with us, O Lord. Let everyone understand and learn new things today. O Lord, make it a blessing to each and every one of us. Be with us throughout the proceedings of the meeting. Bless us, guide us, and keep us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, sir. Small cheer and great welcome makes a merry feast. May now invite Dr. Joyce Priya Kumari, Head of the Department of Zoology, to welcome the gathering.
A very good morning to one and all present here. The speaker for this lecture, Dr. Fiona Lawton, our beloved principal, Dr. Wilson, faculty members and friends from China, Australia, Sri Lanka, and Africa, scientists, heads of various departments, faculty members from our college and other institutions, my dear colleagues and student friends. I'm delighted to welcome all of you for this webinar on effects of climate change on biodiversity, especially on turtles. I'm sure some of us would have been a part of the sea turtle conservation program for Olive Ridley in Chennai. Over a period of 30 plus years, students were involved in, along with NGOs, would have gone for turtle walk along the Marina Beach up to Neelangarai, where the turtle hatchery is situated. And actually, I was also part of this conservation program. It was the Students Sea Turtle Conservation Network, a voluntary group working since 1987 for conserving olive ridley, that is Leptoculus olivaceae. And so we are actually very happy to have our chief guest to talk about this particular aspect. I'm sure there is a record on this olive ridley, that is change in population, especially in Chennai also. Now we have Dr. Lawton to explain the reason for these changes, and we are thankful for her. Thankful to her for accepting our invitation and to be a part of this great program. And I warmly welcome you, Madam Dr. Lawton. And at this juncture, I would also especially welcome our dear principal, Dr. Wilson. So thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to conduct this international webinar, and also for your presence here. and on behalf of the Department of Zoology, and I take this opportunity to welcome each and every one of you for present here for this program. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. There is a famous quote by Seth Godin which says, "Leadership is the art of giving people a platform for spreading ideas that work." We have one such eminent leader with us who helps spread ideas to make it reality. May I now invite our dear principal, Dr. Paul Wilson, to greet the gathering.
Sorry, you have to unmute the phone, microphone.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Dr. Ashik?
Ma'am's problem with sir's audio. So we're not able to hear you, sir.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes. The head of the department. Why is it? Hello? Yeah. The head of the Department of Zoology, Dr. Joyce Kumari, Dr. Anita Perlin, who organizes this international webinar, and the faculty members of the Department of Zoology, and the participants from all over the world. Very happy to hear that there are participants from different parts of the world, and we have an international speaker as a part of this international webinar. As I used to mention always, that it's a blessing in disguise that during this pandemic crisis, we have international mobility, which is very easy for all of us to access to through this Zoom meetings that we arrange. I'm sure that this kind of meetings that we have with the people from other universities would help us to interact with them, and it will really help us. And the topic that you've taken up on biodiversity conservation, I'm sure definitely it will add value to your own students. And I was also discussing with the Department of Zoology on one particular occasion that my burden with respect to the campus is this. I have given a problem statement. We have a dog-deer conflict in the campus. I hope many of you are aware of this. This is not to do with the title of this particular webinar, but let me share it because there are a lot of participants here. Dog-deer conflict. The reason is that during this particular pandemic crisis, there are no students, no halls are trying to serve food. No students normally used to pet the dogs and they serve food. So dogs, they form a pack quickly and they cause a lot of harm to deer, and some of the deer, they die. Now we are not able to moderate this wild behavior of dogs during the season. This is a problem statement for the Department of Zoology. Can we domesticate the dogs, add value, and send them for a stray dog adoption? Or as a part of your animal behavior that you study as a part of your zoology, can you do something about it? Taking this particular problem and address this. I'm just remitting this issue to the Department of Zoology. Thank you for talking. No, thank you for bearing with me when I just move ahead from whatever you're trying to discuss today. But this is an occasion. So I just leave this particular problem statement with the Department of Zoology to take up and help us solve this issue of stray dogs creating a conflict with the deer population here on the campus. And you know that we are struggling. We are having a lot of issues with the Department of Forest. So I'm leaving to the Department of Zoology to take it as an integral part of animal behavior study that you do as a part of your exercise. So I wish all success in your conduct of international webinar. And I appeal to you that please conduct a lot of workshops, adding skill to the Department of Zoology students so that when they go out, they have some skills to carry along with them. So wishing you all success. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I know that we're all eager to hear from the speaker, but before that, I request Dr. Anandi Rachel Livingston, Senior Faculty of the Department of Zoology, to introduce the speaker to all of us. Over to you, ma'am.
Good morning. Thank you, Lavanya.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, everyone. It's my privilege to introduce the Chief Guest of the day, Dr. Fiona Loden. Dr. Fiona Loden has done her education from Western Sydney University. She has done a doctorate in which she has done the studies on embryonic development in turtles and a long-term study on juvenile growth. In 2009, she has done a BSc Honours project on immunocompetence in the red-tailed phascogale mouse, red-tailed mouse. She has done a bachelor's in animal science from Western Sydney University. And she has, Dr. Fiona has been employed as a sessional teaching in UWS College, Nirimba, since 2015. Since 2018, she has been her tutor in the Western Sydney University, and she has been teaching in the School of Nursing and Midwifery area, where she has been teaching as a team for the nursing as well as the midwifery students, where they learn a foundation of human biology. Dr. Fiona had been the lecturer in the Western Sydney University, and she has been teaching genetics in the summer program, and she has been presenting the summer series lectures for the genetics course. In 2017 to 18, she had been a member of Samaj College, Nairobi, Kenya, and as well as a liaison teacher for focus on biology. And she had been ensured to complete full support without any differences in the time zones and available equipment. Dr. Fiona had been the subject lead in the UWS College, Nirimba, and her focus is mainly on biology and the fundamentals of health science. From 2015 to 2017, Dr. Fiona had been the research assistant in the University of Western Sydney. Turtle nutrition that is what the main thing she had been doing. She had carried out a feeding trial for several commercial turtle feeds and analyzed feeds and feces for nutritional content. This report, as such, had been compiled with a thorough literature review for a private company. I think she's also a consultant for that, I think so. And Dr. Fiona is a guest lecturer at Western Sydney University, and she handles animal physiology and biological adaptations to climate change. I think she's the apt person to talk today on climate changes that has occurred and how the sea turtles have been affected. Dr. Fiona has many awards to her credit, especially the travel grant from the Australian Society of Herpetology, the Swain Grant from the Western Sydney University Hawkesbury Foundation, Australian Postgraduate Award, UWS Top-Up Scholarship, UWS Honours Scholarship, UWS Dean's Merit List. And she has many papers that have been published. We are very happy to have you, Dr. Fiona, in our midst today to speak to our students and all the faculty members as well as the research scholars. And may I invite you to deliver your lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you very much for that introduction. It's very humbling. And thank you so much to everyone for having me here today. I just want to sorry about this. I'll just share my screen so I can get my PowerPoint ready and we'll press on. Before we do start, I would like to thank everyone for coming here. I'm very humbled to be here and with so many accomplished people as well. It's a little bit intimidating, to be honest. So hopefully you'll find my presentation enjoyable and informative. And of course, we'll have time for some questions after my presentation. So let's get started. So please let me know if for any reason you're not seeing what I hope you're seeing. So today I'm going to be talking about the implications of climate change on turtle populations. My research in particular focused on freshwater turtle species, in particular one species, using that as a study species. However, today I'm going to be talking about a wider topic of worldwide turtles, so marine turtles, freshwater turtles, land turtles, just to sort of encompass a few more current issues and also outline what my research has sort of shown in regards to turtle populations and possible threats to them. So as was just mentioned, I have a degree in Bachelor of Animal Science, Bachelor of Honours, where I looked at immunocompetence in red-tailed phascogels. So they are small, sort of, they look like mice or rats, but they're arboreal marsupials. Oh, can you hear me? I think, hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah, you're audible, Fiona.
Okay, great. Sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yes.
So our red-tailed phascogels, they are an endangered species in Australia. They're very cute though. They look like rats but live in trees, much cuter than rats, and they bite really hard. So that was an enjoyable year. I did get a few bites from them, but it was very interesting as well. And then when I went into my PhD, I wanted to look more at an experimental design where I was using large numbers of organisms or animals so that I could just try to tease out some themes that were happening in response to climate change. Climate change and biodiversity are two issues that are very important to me, and I feel that, you know, we're really on the precipice of hopefully a changing point, but essentially if we can't change the trajectory of the way our environment and how we're mistreating it is going, then I'm not sure what the long-term ramifications of that will be. So we really need to, people have been talking about acting on climate change now for many, many years, decades even, but we really are at the point where it's time to put our foot down and as society say that we need to make these changes and force the governments and large businesses to take on those changes. Okay, so during my talk today, I'm going to be talking about the histories of turtles, also then the role of turtles in ecosystems and society. I'm going to then show you what my studies have shown about climate change and turtles. In particular, my studies focus on embryonic development in freshwater species and then also juvenile development. So I did during my PhD a sort of 12-month study where I monitored growth rates in juvenile turtles and looked at how their incubation temperatures affected growth rates and tried to sort of work out what changes might implicate their future lifespans. And then towards the end, I'll be talking about other current threats to turtles. And lastly, what can we do to help our beloved turtles? So turtles are reptiles. They've been around for a long, long time. So we have evidence to support that turtles existed in some form between almost 300 million years ago, not quite there, but almost. And we see this body structure of turtles that it seems to have sort of been maintained throughout these years. There have been variations, but when we think about a group of organisms that have been around for so long, we really see this conserved body shape amongst the turtles. So this particular turtle species here, our Melonia platyceps, we had it existed on Lord Howe Island off the coast of Australia. It persisted for around 50 million years, we think, and when it became extinct, its extinction coincided with close to the arrival of humans. So whether there was some sort of interaction there, but when we talk about our ancient turtles, we do have evidence that they have, lived with dinosaurs, but also may have coexisted around with people as well, these ancient species. Okay, so our ancient turtles, while our turtles today don't have any teeth, they've just sort of got plates that they use to crush their food with, sharp, sort of really strong jaws, and maybe some of them have, sharp sort of edges to their jaws as well. Ancient turtles may have actually had teeth, which, seems a little bit frightening to me. We also see that they lacked a shell that we consider today, including the plastron, the sort of stomach, what we would assume the stomach part, and the carapace, the dorsal part of their shell. And as we see the turtles evolving, the turtle shell evolved, and as the turtle shell evolved, perhaps to provide more protection, because remember these turtles were around with dinosaurs as well, with large predators, may have provided that protection from those large predators, but it also reduced flexibility in the spine and crawling speed. And so now our turtles have this reputation of being, slow moving animals, but in particular, that's more so on land. When we see them in the water, and as I'm sure you all have seen in some form or another on television or in real life, they are quite graceful in their movements, but on land, they do look a little bit clumsy. During my studies, I have seen our turtles do this sort of little waddle as they're trying to get away and into the water. It's really cute. Now, when we look at turtles that populate the earth, we've got three sort of basic groups that we can group them into: our land turtles or terrestrial turtles, freshwater turtles, and marine turtles. And structurally, they're all similar, but they have very distinct differences as well. So our terrestrial turtles, we see them with a sort of really dome-shaped carapace. That sort of epitome of the turtle that you'd see in a cartoon, and clubbed feet to help them get around on dry land. We've got then our freshwater turtles, where their carapace is flatter, their toes are webbed, and they've got claws on all of their feet to help with digging in the sand, and the webbing between their feet is to help with their movement through the water. And again, we see that sort of more streamlined, flatter carapace to help them through water as well. And then lastly, probably our most iconic turtles are our marine turtles, which spend large portions of their life at sea. They have really evolved elongated, larger front flippers to help move them through the water. And then all of these groups of turtles do spend time on land and in water. So they're pretty interesting in that respect, because they not only need to be well adapted for water, but they also need to be well enough adapted for land, or vice versa if they're terrestrial turtles. So what roles do turtles play in our ecosystem? We see a few things here. Turtles are great at maintaining a habitat. They help to keep down numbers of things like jellyfish. So in marine systems, jellyfish, they tend to feed on larval fish, so small fish. So by reducing the numbers of jellyfish in an area, this helps the larval fish to be able to grow into large fish and then reproduce, as opposed to being taken out early and not reaching that sexual maturity. We also see with our human activity in our marine systems as well that jellyfish numbers have populated, and this is to do with things like our humans taking larger predators out of the marine systems, predators that would normally feed on jellyfish, so they don't have those enough predators in their habitat now. The jellyfish also like to cling to structures that are man-made structures, so by putting in more docking systems and things like that, we see that increases jellyfish numbers as well, which then has the knock-on effect of reducing fish numbers and reducing larger fish numbers, which then is going to impact on fisheries and how much they can catch, because we're reducing the numbers of large fish in the ecosystem. So with turtles, by how they feed on jellyfish, they really are helping to stabilize that marine food web so that one species doesn't start to dominate over the other. We see them with nutrient cycling when turtles, marine turtles in particular, when they're feeding in the oceans, but then coming back to their coastal regions to lay their eggs. Any eggs that don't develop then get broken down by bacteria and microorganisms on the beaches, and then they get fed back into plant life on those beaches. So the turtles are really delivering much needed nutrients to these coastal regions that otherwise might not get that extra nutrient. So our turtles and how they move between different areas have a really large role in nutrient cycling as well. Also, those, when we look at the eggs that are laid on beaches, they play an important role in food chains for terrestrial animals as well, because they get preyed upon by terrestrial animals and form parts of the diet for terrestrial animals as well. When we look at how society views turtles, there's a really interesting dynamic with society and turtles, because we have on one end of the spectrum, we've got our ecotourism, where people just, I mean, I'm one of them, we just love to look at turtles. They're really beautiful, they're calming. And so it's estimated that there's something like 175,000 people, not now, not during COVID times, but pre-COVID, there was something like 175,000 people taking sea turtle tours annually. And this was to more than 90 sites in more than 40 different countries. So it is quite lucrative in terms of ecotourism. We also see our turtles playing a role in things like using turtle meat, turtle eggs, or shell for profit. So we see these revenue coming from either using turtle meat or collecting eggs to sell on. And even some cultures view the eggs as a delicacy as well. So we know that large amounts of turtle eggs are consumed in Southeast Asian subregions, because this is what started as a traditional food source within local communities. It's now become more sort of widespread, and there are now some beliefs about aphrodisiac qualities or medicinal properties of turtle eggs to really promote this commercial market for eggs within Southeast Asia. Even in Australia, in Perth, turtle soup was so popular, maybe not Perth, but in Western Australia, even in the 70s, we had a canning company for turtle soup. So we do see that side of the turtle sort of society as well. And then lastly, our traditional or cultural impact. So our oldest living culture or civilization, the Aboriginals of Australia, they feature turtles in their Dreamtime stories. For instance, the story of how the turtle got its shell, which is, well, in short, it was basically a turtle and an echidna living together quite happily until the turtle ate the echidna's baby one day. And so the echidna threw rocks at the turtles in retaliation, and the rocks stuck and formed part of its shell. And there are other beliefs as well, other stories associated with turtles. So turtles have held this really long-standing cultural structure within our society, and played a large part in our society as well. So what about climate change and turtles? So turtles living part of their life in both land and sea, and water, they need to really overcome climate change, not just in one ecosystem or in one facet of their lives, but they're challenged both on climate change issues that are affecting land and climate change issues that are affecting sea or the water systems as well. So with turtles and other populations such as lizards, crocodiles, and tuatora, turtles exhibit what we call temperature sex determination. So whereas most animal species will use genetics as a way of determining whether they're going to be either sex, so male or female, with some reptiles, including a lot of turtle species, they're actually, their sex is determined during embryonic development. So it's not determined at when the egg is laid or at conception. It depends on what temperature that egg is incubated in, and that's going to determine which proteins are produced during incubation. This is going to provide either the proteins that will result in a male turtle being produced or a female turtle being produced. What we see is with most of our temperature sex determination that at warmer temperatures, we see mostly females being produced, and at lower temperatures, we see mostly males. But when we see a range of temperatures, so for instance, a fluctuation within the nest, we can have both males and females being produced within a clutch, within a nest. But it really does depend on what temperature that individual egg is being incubated at. Now, in terms of climate change, we're probably likely to see our environmental climate getting warmer, which might indicate we might get more females being born than males. But interestingly, turtles can modify this sex determination to some degree. For instance, where they lay their nest, whether it's in shade or whether it's in full sun, that's going to have some degree of effect on the temperature of the turtle nest. Of course, when we start to see problems like their nest habitats being reduced in size, this sort of choice is taken away from them, and whether or not turtles will actively choose one side or another, I don't think that's been investigated yet. So I would say it's probably unlikely, but it is interesting that placement of nest might also be able to control the temperature of the nest. So when it comes to my study species, I studied freshwater turtles. So they don't actually have temperature sex determination, not my species. I studied short-necked Murray River turtles, Emydura macquarieii. As you can see, the juveniles and hatchlings are pretty adorable. So it was a wonderful project to be involved with. We can see here, this is a juvenile or hatchling freshwater Murray River turtle. Some of the things that make it different from a marine turtle are these front flippers here. You can actually see like there are claws on each of those phalanges and webbing between them as well. They don't have that iconic flipper at the front. As the juveniles progress into adulthood, we start to see this streamlined shape as opposed to them being born like quite sort of bumpy and sort of, rigidy. They really start to smooth out and become quite, streamlined looking, but still we can see the webbing between the toes to help them in the water, but it also makes them these sorts of front feet instead of flippers that helps them make them a bit more mobile on land. So not all freshwater species will be genetically sex determined, but my species were. And this made it easier for me to then look at how climate change or how temperature changes will affect things aside from just sex determination, because that is important, of course, but I wanted to have a look at other implications that climate change might have. So one of my first studies looked at whether or not the turtles' eggs, when they were incubated at a constant temperature, did they experience any circadian rhythms or any fluctuations of respiration or heart rates? And this was because there was a study done on snakes that showed that even at constant temperature, these snakes seem to exhibit diurnal fluctuations in heart rate. So we wanted to see if that was going to be the same in turtles and use that as sort of just a jumping off point to look at different embryonic development strategies in turtles. And what we found that unlike the snakes in that previous study mentioned, our turtles didn't experience diurnal fluctuations in that during daytime their heart rate was increased and nighttime their heart rate decreased, but they did exhibit circadian rhythms that roughly followed a 24-hour clock, but they weren't synchronized together. So individuals were on their own sort of pathway. These eggs weren't incubated together, so potentially within a clutch, within a nest, we might see similar heart rates. They might be in tune with each other and sort of feeding, sort of listening to each other and working together. We do know that turtles do have some, we suspect they have some sort of communication within the nest, whether it be via movement, so vibrating within the egg, moving within the egg, or it could be to do with chemical levels. It hasn't really been looked at in great detail, or I haven't seen it being looked at in great detail as yet. But there might be some sort of communication happening within a nest. We know that certain species of turtles will hatch synchronously. So some turtles will slow down their respiratory rates in order to delay their development, and others will speed up their respiratory rates in order to shorten their incubation time. And they do this so that as a whole, as a clutch or a nest, they can hatch together and kind of, I guess, flood the market, so as to speak. So that whole safety in numbers, if lots of turtles are hatching at once, then the predators, you know, there are X amount of predators, they can't get all of them. So some will survive and make it to that all important journey to the water. So this was one of our first studies. We took this and then decided to have a look at a longer term study of how genetics, in terms of what the mother looked like. Was she larger in size? What size were the eggs that she was producing? So there has been research that shows that genetics does play an important role in growth rates, and in particular in size of eggs as well. So a larger female turtle would generally produce larger eggs, and I'm not sure about more of them, but definitely larger eggs than what a smaller female turtle will. And turtles are interesting because, unlike humans and a lot of mammals, turtles don't actually go through senescence. So they don't go through a decline in reproductive productivity as they age. They essentially are able to keep producing offspring until they no longer live. So we looked at the genetic implications. We can see the top graph over here is showing different clutches. So a clutch is a group of eggs being deposited by one mother. And when we looked at how much these juveniles had grown, we saw that, yes, clutch dynamics made an important effect onto growth rates. So this G clutch here came from a larger turtle than what A and E did. So it did influence the growth rate of the hatchlings coming from that larger turtle. We also looked at incubation temperature. So when we collected these turtle eggs, we chose to incubate some turtles at 26 degrees, which is stable degrees, so no fluctuations, and it was equivalent to what the bottom of a Murray River turtle nest would be from the literature we'd looked at. So roughly a mean 26 degrees Celsius, as opposed to the top of a nest, which it fluctuates around 30 degrees Celsius. So that's why we chose those two different incubation temperatures, because they related to what would be experienced in the wild. We did see that our incubation temperature affected growth rates at 11 months. So this was 11 months after hatching. We saw that the turtles that were incubated at the higher temperature did have a significantly faster growing rate than what our lower temperature turtles did. And the last thing we looked at is the post-hatching environment. So in the post-hatching environment, we we kept turtles in tanks, but some of those tanks had heaters in them, and it didn't heat the water up so that it was a high temperature. What it did was it actually took the bottom cold temperature off the water. So instead of allowing the water temperature to fluctuate with sunlight and environmental conditions, we allowed the fluctuations, but then we wouldn't let the water get below 15 degrees. So if the water started to go below 15 degrees, then the heater would turn on and not let it below 15 degrees. With turtles, they don't go through what we call hibernation, but they do go through into like a type of torpor where their respiration slows down a lot during colder periods. And there have been some suggestions that might help with why they seem to age so well and why they live so long, because they go through these periods of really low respiratory sections where their body essentially slows right down. And so our turtles in this treatment, in the heated treatment, weren't really allowed to get into that torpor, whereas we saw in the unheated experiment that those turtles, we saw them have a reduced intake of food as well, that even though they were fed like they had access to food, they just didn't eat as much as what the heated turtles did. I should also mention, for those of you who aren't familiar with turtles or reptiles are what we call ectothermic, which means that unlike mammals, they can't control or they can't maintain their body temperature at a set sort of at a narrow range. Our turtles rely on environmental conditions to either warm them up or cool them down. They can change their body temperature using behavioral modifications, such as what I was mentioning with where the female turtles choose to lay their nests. But with our turtles, active turtles, they can go and bask themselves in the sun to warm them up on a cold day, or they can then move into shade or into water if they're too hot. And that's how they use behavioral modifications to control their body temperature. So with this experiment, our turtles were still able to access outside of the water or stay in the water if they wanted to. They had access to both, but we did find that the turtles in the heated ponds had a very much increased in size at 11 months compared to the untreated ponds. So after looking at our heart rates at constant temperatures, and then also looking at how our turtles incubated and the incubation lengths of different temperatures at 26 and 30 degrees Celsius, we decided to look at the egg position within the nest. So when a turtle will lay their eggs, essentially they'll dig a hole, as you can see, and start laying their eggs. So the first eggs that they lay end up at the base of the nest. And in large sea turtles, we can see clutches of, 100 eggs or more even, or even the same turtle will lay several different several different nests because they have so many eggs. So in these large clutches, and they're a lot deeper than freshwater nests as well, we don't see as much temperature fluctuations between the top and bottom of the nest. They kind of together have a more stable nest environment. But with freshwater species that nest closer to the surface, we do see greater fluctuations between eggs that are oviposited first, so they end up at the bottom of the nest, as opposed to those that are oviposited last, which end up at the top of the nest. But despite this difference in temperature, essentially temperature incubation within a nest, they still seem to hatch synchronously. So there must be something else at play to enable them to do that. So we decided to have a look at an experiment where we took turtles' eggs that were oviposited first and placed them in temperatures that replicated the top of the nest. So this is opposite to what they should be exhibiting or should be encountering in the wild. And we did the reverse as well. We took our eggs that were oviposited the last and placed them in temperatures that they would see at the bottom of the nest had they been oviposited earlier. And of course, we had our controls as well, where we put them at the normal temperature that they would normally be exhibiting. Now, what I've done in a really silly move is I've actually taken off what the key was for this graph, but I'm pretty sure this one here, this bottom temperature was equivalent to the bottom of the nest, where we had temperatures fluctuating between 23 degrees and 29 degrees. And then the top temperature here, that's equivalent to what they should have experienced at the top of the nest. So greater fluctuations between 19 and 33, but then intermediate sort of temperatures at 26 as well. And we did find that there seemed to be, in particular, this one here, I think these guys were the ones that were the treatment group that should have actually been in the top sort of the nest, but we had put them into bottom conditions. And so they really did we did see a really sort of stark difference in their heart rate. So we thought maybe that might have been due to maybe hormones that might be present in the egg at oviposition, during ovidepositing, that might make them slow down their respiration to help the eggs that were oviposited first, to help them sort of catch up to their development, so make them, develop at a slower rate. But our results couldn't really tell one way or another. We really need to delve further into that and look at the differences in hormones between eggs that are at the top of a nest and eggs that are at the bottom of a nest. But all we could tell that there was something at play there that could be helping synchronize these hatching events. Another thing that we found out was this sort of shows also the nest position versus the incubation time that it took. So these are the top eggs in the low fluctuating temperature. These were our treatment group. So these eggs should have actually been oviposited. They were oviposited last. They should have been at the top of the nest, but they were actually in the bottom nest conditions, our conditions. And we saw that they had the longest incubation time, which is essentially what that other graph was showing as well. We also saw that the other treatment group, so the bottom eggs, that were now in their non-normal temperature regime, they actually took a lot longer during incubation as well. So both our treatment groups ended up with a much longer incubation time than our control groups. And we can see there was actually more difference between the treatment groups as well, suggesting that had they been reversed and together, potentially they might not have hatched synchronously, which is really interesting to think about. So with the nest position versus when they hatch and incubation time, we really do need to find out a bit more information as to what is sort of driving the incubation. If it's not temperature determined, then there must be something else. We suspect maybe hormones, but again, we need to have a look at that. Now, what we also did was we looked at these turtles over 11 months as well and looked at their growth rate. So did we see any change in growth rate depending on whether they were in the control group or whether they were in the treatment group? And if we have a look at our solid blue line here that had the fastest growth rate, they were in our control group. So these eggs were oviposited late. So they were incubated essentially at wider fluctuating temperatures, and they had a much faster growth rate than our others. Our treatment groups, so the solid red one, by comparison, even though they were incubated at the same temperature, they were both in the warmer, more fluctuating thermal regime, they had the slowest growth rate out of all the four. So it really does show that there's more to play than just incubation temperature. So there might be, our turtles might be harboring some sort of other resilience that might help them overcome temperature changes that climate change might force on them. So there is a little bit of hope there, but again, we need to have a little bit more study in order to find out what's really going on and what we can do, how we can use this in a real world situation as well. Now, when we look at turtles in general, they're facing a lot of threats, and I'm sure most of you probably could name a few off the top of your head. Turtles are an iconic species. They're one of those umbrella species that, people love to look at them. They generate a lot of donations because they evoke empathy from humans, especially when we see images of turtles that are sick or they've been trapped up in netting or something like that because of our human interactions with turtles and how we've impacted on their environment. So one of our biggest threats to turtle populations is pollution. So we know about our plastics pollution and how we've sort of run riot with plastics on the earth. What we see is 11 million tons of plastic is produced, is in the ocean annually, is put into the ocean annually. But by 2040, we're expecting this to rise to 29 million tons annually. And what does this, what does this have to do with turtles? We see turtles will go and they mistake bags in the ocean for jellyfish. And as I mentioned earlier, jellyfish form a large portion of some marine turtles' diets. So they ingest these bags or these other plastics and they end up getting sick from them. We also see, plastic getting caught around turtles' fins or necks, and even I should have found a picture. There's this iconic photo of ringed plastic rings around a turtle that was aptly named Peanut, because its shell grew around the plastic ring, and so it had this sort of hourglass shape to the shell. Because that plastic ring was so strong, the turtle shell couldn't sort of break it open. It just grew around it. So in addition to plastics, we also see chemical pollutants being put into our oceans and waterways as well. So for instance, probably more so with our freshwater species, with agricultural runoff and human activity runoff, we see these chemical pollutants weakening turtle immune systems and making them more vulnerable to disease as well. Habitat destruction and displacement. So we see the loss of nesting sites. Turtles, as I said, they need to live both in the water, but also come onto land for nesting. But where they want to nest also is sort of great locations for where people want to enjoy their, time and live, beautiful views of the ocean and whatnot. So we see lots of coastal development happening, which restricts the nesting sites available for these turtles. Some species of turtles will actually only return to the site that they were born at as well, where they hatched from. So when that nesting site is no longer there because it's been replaced by some sort of human development, then they have nowhere to nest. We also see our climate change causing rising sea levels and more erratic storms, which leads to erosions on coastal environments, which then impacts on nesting sites. We see, as a result of these two things, nest inundation, where there is, by some miracle, there's too many turtles, but it's just because there's not enough nesting sites that we see turtles who nest earlier, their nests get destroyed by turtles coming on to nest after them and inadvertently digging up their nest and laying their eggs on top of them. Human activities such as putting in artificial lighting, can deter females from coming into to oviposit. And it can also disorientate hatchlings as well. So instead of heading towards the ocean, they're heading in a different direction and not reaching the ocean. Lastly, our land-based runoff, which I touched on with pollution, is also impacting on habitat sites as well and causing nutrient imbalances there, and coral bleaching as well. So coral bleaching in turtle, some species of turtles live in coral reefs and help to maintain the ecosystem in those coral reefs. But when coral bleaching occurs, the reef system, it shifts out of balance, and so now there's less food available for the turtles. They can't sort of stay there anymore without that food being available. Accidental drowning. So we see thousands of turtles killed every year by commercial fishing line. They wind up as bycatchment when commercial fishers are trying to catch for different species, but end up with turtles inadvertently as a bycatch. Some turtles are attracted to baiting areas, so fishing areas, by getting, turtles have a really heightened sense of smell in water, so they will be attracted towards the bait in fishing areas as they're migrating through them, and then get tangled up in the netting associated with that. We also see crab traps as well. So crab traps are there to get the crabs to go into them, but then all the nettings makes the crabs unable to leave the crab trap. But turtles unfortunately run in there as well, and then they get caught in the trap they're unable to get to surface, and by the time the fisherman comes to collect and see if they've caught any crabs, the turtle's suffocated because it hasn't been able to reach the surface. Also, with this imbalance in ecosystems, we see, even though turtles do provide a food source for predators, and an important food source for predators, our turtles do have this fairly robust reproductive strategy of laying many eggs in the hope of one of them will reach maturity and go on to have reach sexual maturity and then continue to lay its own eggs. So they do have a really large sort of output of eggs, but what we're seeing now is the predators are just that imbalance of predators to turtles are really impacting now on how many hatchlings survive, or even how many nests survive as well. So this fox down the bottom, this is taken along the Murray River, and actually by my supervisor, Dr. Ricky Spencer. And foxes are a real problem in Australia. They're an introduced species, and yeah, they go and dig up the eggs like before the eggs have a chance to develop, and so it's caused turtle numbers to decline in areas where there are large fox numbers. Our over-harvesting of turtles and eggs. So this is an interesting one because turtles are cultural, cultural species, and some communities actually rely on turtle eggs for their income. So what some governments have done, if they've put in strategies to use the community or to work with the community to help protect the eggs. So when we talk about turtle inundation of nest sites where there's too many turtles to nest in that area, the government, such as this one in Costa Rica, will actually recruit the locals. They'll give them a set amount of time from the onset of turtle nesting, so 48 hours or something like that, to collect as many eggs as they can. And then after that, they're charged with protecting the area from other predators. And it actually works quite well, or it has done in some areas, because then now these eggs are protected from predators, but also the community gets enough eggs for their own purposes and to generate income from, while protecting a vast majority of eggs as well. So this is one quite interesting strategy that hopefully might provide some sort of future for turtle species. So what can we do to help with our turtle population? Probably the biggest thing is just to be aware and be educated about the issues surrounding turtles, and then make sustainable and ethical choices where you can. And of course, you can get more involved with volunteer and research groups as well in order to get a bit more hands-on. So just lastly, I'd like to thank a few people for today. So thank you to my supervisor, Dr. Ricky Spencer, who carried out this research with me. Thank you to Dr. Anita for liaising with me in order to get me here, and Madras Christian College as well, of course, to help me for hosting this webinar and allowing me to come along. And then my friend, Dr. Catherine Prabhu, who I think I saw was here. Thank you for connecting me with the organization as well. So I think I'd like to, I'm not sure if I need to hand this over to someone else or if I should just start answering questions in the chat bar. Anita, what do you think? Or Lavinia?
Ma'am, yes, ma'am,
Yeah.
I have a few questions. But before that, ma'am, that was indeed a very informative and interesting session. Thank you, Dr. Fiona, for sharing your knowledge with us through this lecture. especially highlighting on the influence of climate change on turtle population and also emphasizing on the threats to turtles. We have a few questions, ma'am. I'll just read it out. The first question is, how much of effect do you see in the difference in sex ratio due to increased temperature, in spite of your turtles not being temperature dependent for sex determination?
So, unfortunately, I don't know enough about that in terms of because my research didn't focus on temperature sex determination. I can't really give a answer one way or another to that one, unfortunately. But I can recommend there are quite a few good websites that you can look at. So if you're interested in, I know that the warmer temperatures are going to give more females, but I don't actually know if we're starting to see that happening in the real world just right now, or if that's something that we're going to shift towards as temperatures increase.
Yes, the next question is, does your research say that increase in temperature changes the growth rate only or also sex determination?
For my species, it was not sex determination. It did have implications on growth rates, which then might have implications on survival rates as they get older. But our studies didn't go that long. That turtles are quite long lived, so ours were somewhat limited in that way. But there are many studies on temperature sex determination, but it depends on the species. So not all turtle species are temperature sex determination, and they won't switch between, they're either going to be genetically determined or temperature sex determined. It's one or the other.
Yes, ma'am. Next question. Industrial chemical waste effects on turtles' life? If yes, how?
So what we see is with industrial waste or chemical waste, depending on what the chemical is, it can disrupt the immune system of turtles, which will then cause the turtles to be more susceptible to disease and more unhealthy, and potentially there might even be reproductive ramifications as well. So I don't know, but potentially there might be ways that chemicals might disrupt progeny from turtles as well. Like it might be cross-generational effects. We have seen that in other species, such as mammals. So it stands to reason it could be turtles, but if the chemicals are harsh enough, they might actually cause the turtle to sort of, well, essentially die before it can reproduce. And so sort of stopping, the turtles are very, very long lived. So anything that shortens their lifespan is going to reduce their reproductive capabilities as well.
Yes, ma'am. Next question. Is there any changes in turtle population during the COVID pandemic?
I saw that question on the chat bar, actually. I was sort of keeping a little eye on that, and I found that a very interesting question. But as far as I know anyway, here, a lot of our research has sort of been put on pause with COVID, because with our research, you need to be working with other people and moving around in locations. So I imagine there probably has been some sort of effect, but I don't know if we're aware of it yet. So it might even be that COVID, I think it'd be more interesting to look at how COVID affected fishing and other industries that impact on turtles, and turtle tourism as well, to see if those things had an effect on turtle populations.
Yes, ma'am. The next question is, did you notice any marked change in clutch size? How nature of the sand or substratum affect hatchling success?
So with our studies, we actually, and I didn't touch on this too much at all, I think, in the presentation, but we actually would trap the turtles in cathedral nettings. And it was kind of a risky, not risky, but it was kind of always precarious because our turtles, as soon as we get this heavy rain in November, where our nesting sites are, they all seem to run out and want to nest within about 24 hours. So we had to keep watching the weather. And then before the rains come, we'd actually drive to our nesting sites, catch loads of turtles and actually induce them to oviposit their eggs. So we had to walk this balance between getting the eggs so that they were developed enough, but not before they'd been hatched, because in our area, our nesting area, we had large fox populations. So we had to really grab those eggs before they laid them. Otherwise, they probably we wouldn't have got them. So we didn't look at any different substrates. We incubated ours in a controlled temperature using vermiculite as a substrate, and we didn't alter different substrates.
Yes, ma'am. Next question. As the temperature determines the sex in sea turtle hatchling, is it advisable to incubate the turtle eggs in increased temperature to get more female population?
That's interesting as well. So I was thinking that is one saving grace, that it is the females that incubate at higher temperatures, but we do also need enough males in order to to fertilize those eggs. And because it's only a very small percentage of turtles who actually reach sexual maturity, because there's such large numbers that get sort of wiped out before they reach that age, I think we still need to have a healthy male population in order to fertilize the female population. But it is probably more benefit that it's females at higher temperatures than males in that respect.
Yes, ma'am. Next question. How do turtles help in navigation?
How do they navigate, was it?
How do turtles help in navigation?
So with turtles, they need to, depending on the type of turtle, I think the question might be asking, like, when a turtle is hatched out, they do try to make it to the ocean, where they'll then live until they reach sexual maturity before coming back to the same nesting site so that they can lay their eggs there. But turtles have some sort of innate sort of navigation system to bring them back to the nesting site. And then we do see, when we see disruptions to that sort of nesting site, they can end up nesting in really weird places instead. Usually doesn't work out too well for the eggs.
Yes, ma'am. Next question. How will the extinction of turtles affect the whole biological or the food chain?
That's a good question. So one of the biggest effects it will have is on those jellyfish populations. So the jellyfish, they feed on larval fish, and when jellyfish populations aren't kept in check, they start to really explode in population numbers, and then they're feeding on more larval fish, which then depletes the amount of fish that reach maturity. So we might see more fish species dying out. We'll also see a reduction in commercial fishing as well, because it's going to disrupt the marine population for that purpose as well. So I think the turtles, they do play a really vital role as a predator of jellyfish.
Yes, ma'am. Next question. Were there any threats to the turtles you studied by destruction of its habitat, by building of dams or sand mining in the rivers?
So my study site, it was quite small. We so we didn't really see any disruption there, but there definitely has been in other places, I'm sure. So whenever we see humans interacting with nesting sites, there is going to be some sort of disruption. And so building dams might be one where they're sort of changing the flow of water, changing the nesting availability as well, but not in my study site, no.
Yes, ma'am. Next question. With the global trade of turtles as pets, do you think invasive species affect native species population?
Without knowing too much about it from a research point of view, yes, I do. We've seen this in a lot of like most other species as well, not just turtles or reptiles, but mammals as well. We do see invasive species really disrupting native populations. And when you get an invasive species or an introduced species, such as here we have what we call penny turtles, which are actually my Murray River shortneck turtles, but they're not native to Sydney, but they're kept as pets. And then they get released when the turtles get too big. People just dump them in a sort of dam or a waterway nearby, and they can displace the native turtles and disrupting just the native ecosystem as well. So yeah, the commercial pet trade of turtles, when they're released without authority into areas that they're not native to, it can very much disrupt the native biosystem.
Yes, ma'am. Next question. When you replace the first laid eggs at a temperature as in the top of nest and the last laid egg being incubated at a temperature as in the bottom of the nest, what exactly caused the change in their heart rate?
We don't know. That's something that we want to know, because we weren't expecting that. We were honestly expecting that the temperature would be telling us what the heart rate was. That's what we were expecting, and our results did not report that. So we need further studies. Some theories we have are hormones, so various hormones. It could even be like maybe even I don't know. I honestly don't know. The only thing I can really think of is hormones being those chemical messengers that might play a role in embryonic development. And so by having them, depending on the order of eggs within the turtle in the oviducts, that seems to me the most logical choice. But it was baffling when it wasn't the temperature. That was very exciting, actually.
Yes, ma'am. The next question is, in Sri Lanka, last month sometime during May, the Pearl Express ship accidentally got fired and destroyed, and it killed nearly 150 turtles and dolphins. Some people say this is because of the chemical effect. Can humans consume the fishes of that particular area?
I don't know. That's out of my, I can't answer that one. Sorry. You'd probably need to speak to a toxicologist for that.
Yes, ma'am. Next question is, in case the population of turtle is increased, what are all the pros and cons of that?
So I guess the pros would be that at the moment, the turtle population has declined. So if it increased, then it might help restore balance to the ecosystems. Further from that, if it increased too much, of course, and then started to displace ecosystems in the other direction, we might see turtles actually destroying some habitats, but we're a long way off before it would reach that level. And what was the other part of the question? Sorry, if they didn't increase?
What are all the pros and cons of that?
The cons, yeah. So if we, the pros would obviously be that it would restore balance, but then the cons would be that it might disrupt the balance in a different way that's unforeseen at the moment. So they might start, if they run out of their own food because there's too many of them, they might start to move on to a new food source, which might have larger consequences for the ecosystem.
Yes, ma'am. The next question is there any global monitoring of marine turtle populations if they are increasing or decreasing?
There are groups all over the world monitoring, and I know earlier someone was talking about the olive ridge turtles in Chennai. So there are people monitoring them, and if you have a look at, say, what would be a good site? Like, I'm sure just a World Turtle Conservation site, they'd have the information there as well. There's a lot of websites devoted to turtles and looking at the broader picture of research, as opposed to looking at quite specific parts of turtle structures or turtle interaction. So if you're after a good broad overview, I'd check out some of the websites that are more aimed at sort of social, more aimed at the general public to looking at turtle populations and their current position.
Yes, ma'am. We have one more question.
Yeah.
Is the Zoological and Marine Biological Survey of respective government monitoring and reporting the effect of climate change on the species like turtles presently?
And what was the first part of that? Is the
Zoological and Marine Biological Survey of respective government monitoring and reporting the effect of climate change on the species like turtles presently?
I would imagine they would be, but I don't know, to be honest, because when I was doing my research, I was more looking at just my individual, really small snapshot of how climate change might affect this type of species, so something like an ectothermic egg-laying species. So I didn't really look at the broader picture until I was trying to think of some interesting things to add to my research for today.
Yes, ma'am. There are no more questions. If at all there are any questions, can the participants put it in the chat box? Or if there are no further more questions, we'll wind up. Participants, the feedback form is put up in the chat box. Kindly fill the feedback form, and the e-certificates will be sent to your email within a week's time. Participants, kindly note that the e-certificate for this international webinar will be sent to your email within a week's time. Yes, if there are no more questions, we'll move on to the next part of the program. Randy Pausch once said, showing gratitude is one of the simplest yet most powerful things humans can do for each other. May I now call upon Dr. Anita Perlin, the organizing secretary of this international webinar, to render the vote of thanks.
Yes, Mrs. Lavanya. I thank God for making this day possible, and it takes immense pleasure in thanking a few important people who made this webinar a reality. I thank our principal, Dr. Paul Wilson, for sharing his thoughts and supporting us to conduct this webinar. I thank the resource person, Dr. Fiona K. Loden, for accepting to share her research experience with us through this webinar. It was indeed exceedingly informative and doubly interesting. At this juncture, I would also like to thank Dr. Catherine Prabhu, a person who was behind all this in introducing Dr. Fiona to me. And Dr. Catherine, thanks again for making Fiona to come over here and to do a talk in this webinar. I take this opportunity also to thank the head of the Department of Zoology, Dr. C. Joyce Priyakumari, for her encouragement and support. I thank the staff of the Department of Zoology for their support, especially Dr. Anandi for introducing the chief guest, Dr. Allen for invoking God's presence, and Mrs. Lavanya for comparing. At this juncture, I would also like to thank all the participants of this webinar. There were actually 517 participants registered, with majority being students, followed by faculty, and surprisingly, there were 7 school students also. Hope you all had a wonderful time. I extend my thanks to the webinar committee, Dr. James Kurian, and his team for their guidance in conducting the webinar, and Dr. Ashik and Mr. Mohan for their technical inputs. I would also like to thank my student friends, Mr. Samuel Asir, the person who is behind the designing of the poster, and Ms. Niharika, Ms. Esther, and Ms. Angeline, who were meticulously coordinating with the participants and the organizing team. The lecture, the overwhelming participation, and the lively interaction during the question and answer session has made the webinar a wonderful experience. I give all glory, honor to the Lord Almighty for his wisdom, grace, and mercy. Once again, thank you all. Kindly fill in the feedback form and submit. And